Quickly, I'm Giovanni Bettini. I'm a lecturer in LEC, and it's a great pleasure to be the moderator for this seminar on decolonizing political ecology. This seminar is part of a broader series of discussions on a number of interesting topics in the field of political ecology, organized by the Political Ecology Group at the Lancaster Environment Center. Also, this series of dialogues, which is open to scholars, researchers, but also students, is linked to a broader number of activities on political ecology that are organized in our department, including, importantly, a new master's program on political ecology that will go live and start in September. And you can find more information on LEC's website, and we will paste a link here on the chat so that if you're interested to know more about the masters in political ecology, you can have a look. Today, we are very pleased to have two guests that will help us thinking through a series of important questions concerning decolonization of and in political ecology. And just briefly, I would like to introduce our two speakers. So first, Dr. Luciana Mendes Barbosa is a critical human geographer. She just finished her PhD here at the Lancaster Environment Center. And Luciana's research is focused on understanding the intersection of precarity, climate impacts, urban resilience policies, and injustices, with a particular specific focus on Rio de Janeiro in Brazil and the current wave of forced displacements that are taking place in informal urban settlements. More broadly, she's working on socio-environmental conflicts linked to development and climate adaptation projects and agendas in the global south. Welcome, Luciana. Also, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Vijay Kolinjivade. And Vijay is based at the Institute of Development Policy at the University of Antwerp. And in his work, he researches the uneven environments that are created and produced by what we could call, in inverted commas, green interventions. And examples of the themes he's been investigating include payment for ecosystem services in North America, and as well as in Central and South Asia. In his current research, is engaging with how spatial and temporal processes of dehumanization and ecological simplification that characterize plantation ecologies are both resisted and reinforced through green thinking. So both speakers are engaged in their research with key themes in the field of political ecology, looking at frictions and contestations and resistances that what we could call green discourse create and face. I won't take too much time, and I'll stop here my brief introduction for the seminar. So just to give you an idea about how the dialogue is structured, we will have Vijay and Luciana to introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly. They will tell us a little bit about their research and how they are engaging or encountering the question of decolonization in their work. Then we will have a dialogue between Luciana and Vijay on a number of salient dimensions in this. And finally, we will have space for questions from you, from the audience. If you have questions while Luciana and Vijay discuss, you're very welcome to post them in the chat. And we will make sure that we pick up on as many questions as possible. Vijay, would you like to start and introduce a bit your work? And I think you would like to share, to show us a few slides.
Yeah, I'm just, let's see. Okay. Um, okay, can you see the shared
Perfect.
screen?
Mhm.
Perfect. So firstly, thanks to all of you, to Francis, to Munna, to Giovanni, to John for inviting me here, and yeah, just to have a space to discuss these very important issues. So I'd like to first just quickly before going further, just to mention that I'm currently on unceded indigenous territory. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederation, is recognized as the custodians of the land and waters in which I'm currently located on, which is um, called Jojage, also known by its settler name as Montreal, Canada. So I want to just situate myself first there. So a bit about me. I'm going to, well, I'll keep it here for now. And sorry, I'm kind of looking at two different screens, so just in case you see me looking different ways. But I'm currently doing a postdoc research at postdoc fellowship at the University of Antwerp. It's a fairly open postdoc right now in the sense that I have the funding and the space to do research on political ecology. So, and specifically around green interventions, as Giovanni was mentioning. And I think that this is already a space for me to reflect on as a researcher, as an academic in this kind of space, doing this, given the space to do that kind of research. I want to, but what I'll talk about in relation to my research is some of the things that I have been doing more recently, which has been looking at the political ecology of these sort of greening interventions in the global north and primarily in Canada. Um, so for these last couple of years, I've been exploring the introduction of payment for environmental services or ecosystem service programs in Canada, in both the province of Quebec and in Prince Edward Island. And here I'm sort of have been exploring the unintended consequences of these programs in terms of the specific visions of conservation that they promote, by whom, the idea of optimizing ecosystem services through specific land use practices, the kinds of natures that get created and sometimes destroyed in this process, and also the underlying political economy by which by which natures are being created and destroyed here. So what role does the payment for ecosystem service have in relation to the experiences of producers, of farmers who are working this land and who are having to make sense of the contradictions of conservation, or however that is defined, and the pressures which they are under to produce, which incidentally is the same pressures of production that we see all throughout the economy, including, as an academic, as academics and researchers ourselves in the Institute. So it's strange that you can see these sorts of parallels at all levels. And so as I was doing this research, I was really reflecting on the parallels between the stories I was hearing from farmers, which really had nothing to do, in a way, with the payment for ecosystem service program, and much more to do with the pressures, the environmental destruction, let's say, the ecological simplification that is being undertaken regardless of whether they believed in it or not, because they have to make a livelihood, they have to survive in this kind of very cutthroat system. So yeah, it was a very strange reflection, because I was also seeing, that some of these patterns are also happening, happening in other spheres, and including in the academy, which I am coming from myself. So it gave me a space to also think about my own positionality here as an outsider in this particular place, outsider in different senses of the word. I wasn't from the island. I'm not considered an islander in the case of Prince Edward Island. I'm not from Canada. I'm you know, all these different dimensions there that were at play. And I think that in some cases it was a good, it could be considered good or bad, but I think for some of the farmers, it was seen to be a good thing because they wanted to be able to share stories in an anonymous way with people that they don't know. So for me, I was clearly someone that just, you know, that they didn't know. And so it offered a space to share kind of intimate stories of their struggles. And so just, but then being able to hold space for those struggles and those stories made me also reflect about what I am doing as a researcher. What does the academy do? What do social sciences do? What is political ecology doing? What do we define as research findings? You know, what are we actually trying to look for, and how do we broadcast these? How do we articulate them? Are we helping ourselves as academics, you know, in this process of understanding their stories? Should we be more honest about what we are doing as political ecologists, especially those who are operating within an institute, within, you know, even with all the freedoms that we might have, let's say, we are also engaging in what might be termed knowledge colonialism by taking stories and reshaping them in particular ways to suit our specific needs, and maybe not being transparent about it. So I think about the work of decolonial scholars Yves Tak and Kei Wen Yang, who talk about, well, they raise a couple points. One, that some knowledge is not what the academy should not deserve certain knowledge forms. And some of these pertain or are relevant to political ecologists, especially this sort of stockpiling of injustice in order to create or broadcast certain stories. But also, I think perhaps more relevant to political ecologists is the political dimension of the work that we do. We are coming in there, obviously, to reveal power asymmetries. And so in that sense, we are, we are, you know, what role is that research? I guess, what is that, is research really the intervention that is needed in a particular case when you are trying to reveal power asymmetries? If you are trying to if you're doing research in that sense, and then you're putting it or inscribing it into the sort of knowledge economy, then are we not engaging in a form of performative act where we're reducing that research to an inquiry in order to gain legitimacy? So I'm asking that question. These are just a reflection that I'm having, and that I've been having, I think, for a long time, and I don't know quite how to how to advance there. So I hope that these kinds of conversations are where this kind of stuff can start happening. And I should mention that a lot of these insights have also come from a lot of reflection. One with one of my very close friends and colleagues at the University of Antwerp, Gert van Hekken. Together, we have really been sitting down and thinking about the contradictions of what we're doing, and also how we can create a space within the institute for to be able to showcase or work through some of these challenges. And I think for political ecologists, especially, we are often looking, and I think this image kind of shows, we're often looking outwards to see how processes of extraction or dispossession might be taking place in different ways. But we don't, and we are also looking at how environments are made. I think that's something that political ecologists do, how we make and unmake environments. But do we look at how we are making and unmaking environments through our work and through the relations of the academy that we are a part of? What kind of material impact does the work of political ecology have? So not to be too meta, but the political ecology of political ecology, let's say, is that something that we can think about, and especially when some of those patterns are very extractive, when they're rooted in that knowledge economy, which is really just, which, yeah, I can maybe talk a bit more about later, but just to think that it's a little bit ironic that might be occurring. And then, so I think with political ecologists and political ecology as a discipline that is embedded within this sort of, within the neoliberal academy, I think there's a lot of pushing and shoving in a way to be able to carve out a niche for ourselves in order to say that we are producing something different, to find out, you know, something new. I for example, in the research I was doing on payment for ecosystem services in Canada, first of all, very few have written about this, very few have done political ecology on it, and I was encouraged, you know, oh well, you found a place where you can do this, and I thought, well, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? You know, finding a location that hasn't yet been explored, that I should then tap into and then become the person who is doing that research in that field. I don't know, it just it feels a little bit like, what, you know, are we, what is this sort of frontier making we are doing in political ecology? Is that something is it just in my head or in our heads, or is it something real that we need to discuss or think about a bit deeper? Yeah, and I guess, yeah, the contradictions, I guess, in relation to our role in the institute, in the university, and how we, yeah, I guess might be gaining specific, you know, specific positions where we're improving our own positionality, our own space within the university through this kind of thing, through these kind of actions. We don't, as I say here, don't really focus on the toxic processes that are being reproduced in order to not only carry out our research, the way we treat our students, the way we treat other staff at the university, the way that we treat our subjects oftentimes as missing co-authors. They're not part of the research that is produced, etc. So. And just to end, just to say that this isn't something new. Obviously, I think especially in the last year or two, there's been a lot more reflection on this, and some of our colleagues within the Political Ecology Network have been thinking through this and reflecting on, yeah, just developing strategies, resources, or alternatives of how we can, yeah, reflect on this, on more structural changes within the academy, defying, you know, promoting a subversiveness to what we are doing, remembering and recalling that political ecology is political, and so we cannot be resigned or satisfied with the positions and the approaches that we are given, even if they are designed in a way to allow us to critique the system. So what are the consequences of being provided a space like that? And how can we avoid ourselves and our work being co-opted in the process? Obviously, talking about these in spaces like this, developing a sort of moral economy of practice that defies the pressures to produce and things like that is one step forward. But I'm sure, you know, yeah, recommoning, I guess, in a way, how we do this kind of research and with whom is one step forward. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Vijay, for a brief and illustrative snapshot, if you like, of the work you're doing that gives us an idea of what your research is about and where you come from in that respect. But also thanks for the quite uncomfortable and provocative questions you raised that have to do, as I see it, with positionality, not only as individual students, scholars, but also as a kind of loosely defined community. And I think that we will have in the second part of this webinar to get back to several of the points we're making about the positionality of political ecology and the impact of the knowledge and community that is created within the broader academic landscape around this notion of political ecology. So thank you very much. I would like now to invite Luciana to do something similar, just introduce herself and give us a few elements to think about and elements to that we'll expand upon in the dialogue. Would you like to share your screen, Luciana? Do you have a presentation you would like to share? I think you might still be muted.
Yes, I just unmuted, sorry. Can you see it now?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, let me see here. Let me see, okay. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Munan and Francis and Vijay for this important and necessary talking about decolonizing political ecologists, no, I would say. Well, first of all, you will start explaining a bit who I am and what I'm doing, was doing, no? I just finished my PhD in geography at Lancaster University. So it's still not uncomfortable, strange to listen to Dr. Luciana. I have to get used to this. And well, I'm Brazilian and I've been working since my undergrad with environmental conflicts and especially with people affected by large development projects like dams and mining in Brazil. And I decided to make a huge, how can I say, a radical turn to urban studies when I decided to look after the process of displacement of people in informal settlements in Rio, in favelas, no? And then I could discover, not discover, but I mean, there's nothing to be discovered, but I mean, I could understand a lot about myself, about my own journey as a researcher and as human being as well, no? And also what kind of political ecology or environmental justice I would like to do, no? So I will start a bit with my own research and how decolonization enters into my own practice. Well, my research consisted on understanding just a moment. My research basically consists on understanding how environmental risk and resilience is being employed to bring about controversial changes or interventions in Rio de Janeiro favelas, or we could call them informal settlements, and how these governmental efforts are being contested by on the favela dwellers. It starts with the data when I arrived in the field that almost around 20,000 households were expulsed from their houses between from 2019 and 2016. And although this is really important data, I would like to say, although around 1,800 households has been removed due to the works of Olympics, there was almost a mass of invisible displacements occurring at the same time than the Olympics displacements that regard to this environmental risk. And I think that this is also interesting to think about decolonizing our own practices, especially the agendas and themes that we choose to work now. Because while everyone was framing those displacements through Olympics, because it was also a buzz word thing that was happening in Rio at the time, there was a massive people that was just ignored because they were living those in the land, those in the hilltops and the areas subject to flooding. And then I decided to look at this, to take a different path and look at what this phenomenon means, no? And then I discovered a lot. I don't know. I faced a lot of discomfort when I was doing that, because it also confronted me with my own ideas of risk, my own ideas of vulnerability, my own ideas of favelas, and it was a shake that changed many things, I would say. So doing research in territories of ongoing dispossession and displacement, and over research because they are also over research, especially because the effect of mega events and violence involves a painful, no, I would say that involves a painful process to learn about injustice, state violence, environmental conflicts, and dehumanizing processes encompassed by this kind of coloniality of power, of being, of knowledge, and also of language, you know. So this coloniality manifested in its very nature through definition of who is under risk, or who is at risk, and who is vulnerable at the time, no, and who is the order of the city. So so doing this research also show me how using such a narrow lenses is still narrow, even if we have critical scholars trying to deconstruct or delink such a understandings on risk and disaster and precarity. We still have such a perceptions dominating how such issues are framed, no? And I think that through this experience that I can call this experience, it was like it was like entering a space of discomfort, allowed me to partially, because I would say partially, you know, because I have to recognize that I'm also implicated in such a kind of forms of coloniality, because Brazil has a settler colonial country, and with this presence of this internal colonialism, the people that are oppressed still want to oppress as well, because for them this is the right model, the convenient model, the powerful model. We still hold such a ambitions, or not ambition, but it's such a desires and within us, and we should challenge them in certain way. And I think that when I face this idea of vulnerability, what does it mean by to be vulnerable? What does it mean by to be at risk? What does it mean by to be in a informal condition? Also was an exercise to look at the mirror and look at myself and my own practice of as researchers, no? So I think this unsettled journey during these 10 months of fieldwork in Rio led me to challenge my own assumptions. And through a very critical reflection and dialogue, especially this, a dialogue with favela dwellers, and which in fact, I would say, result in this kind of decolonization of my own research practices. And so with this experience, this confrontation, I could realize there is loads of potential for radical change, you know, by working through and resisting within research space of discomfort. And this space of discomfort should be created by us in the university with our students. No, I think it's a pedagogical process as well, because yeah, there is totally different realities outside there, and sometimes we come with some assumptions that we can address some issues, and just realize when you're there that confronted with such a tools, that we can gain from the university, that they in fact cannot help us to really understand and also fight against such structures of injustice and domination and oppression. Yeah, that's it. if I make my, I would like to show some pictures because I think it maybe can be an interesting just to talk about them. Those pictures were taken during the process of a violent displacement that took place in Rio. And those are some examples of the favelas that I investigated and how this issue of refusal that Vijay was talking about, which kind of frames or kind of approach should we refuse when we are researching such a marginalized spaces. And someone could question me, oh, but why are you using such a very shocking kind of pictures? But that's the point, the favelados want it. And for them, it's really important to get visibility, to show how state can be violent with such a non-normative spaces, no? And then and they always asked me to show this and spread the word to different audiences. So and then I think this is interesting. The pictures that I selected were they I think they can speak by themselves, because they show this very condition of vulnerability, of being exposed to power, but at the same time, as you can see it shows also the process of agency that was also interesting in my research, you know, and vulnerability can also have potential for agency. And usually when we are looking at these westernized frames of vulnerability, which when I was working in my thesis, is that we just ignore that, no, and the potential for agency. And I think that such a pictures and such a process of resistance just show that. You see the first woman, Peña from Vila Autódromo favela. At the beginning, she was there and with her face bleeding, no? And now she's there just fighting against removals. And then, and that picture changed the course of displacement in her favela. So how vulnerability has this potential for political subjectivities emerge as well, no? And this, I think it's part of this decolonizing process as well, no? We cannot see just people living hilltops with at risk of disaster. What we should question in that this as well has only perpetrators of their condition or victims of some other process, but we can also see them as agents, and there are meanings in when there are meanings that can be carried out by those territories as well, no? And I would like just to share those. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for this brief intro to your research work, but also for your thoughts about, once again, agency, positionality, and the risks that as academics, by taking part into this bigger game, we end up reproducing rather than escaping coloniality. And I think there are quite a number of resonances between the concerns and reflections you shared with us and those Vijay also mentioned. As next step, I would like to start the dialogue, and I have several questions I would like to ask the two of you, Vijay and Luciana, but a few of my questions were also raised by participants, and so I'm going to start from there, and if there is time, I will also bring in my questions. For instance, Laura has a question to Vijay. Thank you, Laura, for raising this. And basically, Laura would like to, if possible, hear a few more thoughts from you, Vijay, on this idea of frontier making. So frontier making as the core of academic work, and Laura is thinking about the kind of potential contribution that thinking about frontier making can have in this critical work of self-reflection, if you like, in the field of political ecology. thinking about frontiers and frontier making, Laura is asking, can it be a productive way to push through some of the contradictions that our own political ecology work in the context of the broader academic landscape entails? Would you like to expand a bit on this and share a few more thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And yeah, I think it's always with all this, it's not that anyone has an answer. It's just like we have to just keep on reflecting on these thoughts and figure out together collectively how to make sense of all of this. But I think there are several elements. Yeah, firstly, I think that the idea of frontier making should always be recognized as being twinned to capital production. The expansion of frontiers historically has been ways of taking resources from the edge and bringing them in. You know, that's the process of settler colonialism has moved in that way. And so, you know, thinking about frontiers in a potentially positive way, I'm just wondering how that could actually take place. We have to perhaps try to be aware of how we are frontier making in the research that we're doing, or in the process of doing political ecology work, whether that is you know, in supporting grounded struggles and or in the academic research that we do. And I think that there's a couple components here that maybe I can touch on from some of the reflections that we have been having. I think one of them is the way that research sometimes, well, I think these are all very deeply implicated in again, as I was mentioning, the knowledge economy and the neoliberal academy. It's really much, you cannot separate that from this, because that is ultimately creating significant contradictions. I think one of them is the professionalization of the academy, the professionalization of the knowledge that we produce as somehow being, you know, experts, that we are going in as experts, and that gives us a special kind of permission in a way to enter into a space and then use that to ultimately, you know, yeah, I mean, to use that in very strategic ways, let's say. And I think about what Achille Mbembe has written, you know, that the educational conditions, which he quotes in, which I quote from him, the educational conditions are increasingly dominated by business principles. So it is the functional links between higher education and knowledge capitalism through these flows, these transnational flows of students, of being oriented as increasingly sort of global agents, to be inserted in this knowledge economy, a global knowledge economy. I think that is, you know, that's one of the edges of this frontier that we can think about. That happens in the university, that's happening in the spaces all the time. Even as we recruit, we try to encourage students into our programs and things like that. That in a way, you know, yeah, what are we doing? You know, how are we need to do that kind of inner work of what will come out of that in the end, and what sort of systems is that inserted within. And we should also remember that this knowledge economy is ruthless competition. I mean, there is, when we talk of frontiers, it's frontiers of critical insight, seeking and tapping into the diversity of global minds, to build, you know, new PhD programs or masters and PhD programs to put, you know, the analytical skills to justify the funding that goes into them, the funding flows, and creating these new streams of financing around them. And these have material impacts. I mean, they have real material impacts, not only on the communities where people come from, but also when the students and when researchers go back to those communities and do their own research. So that's one thing. I think the professionalization of what we are doing is one aspect by which the frontier is extending, and another is critique. And I think of the work of Harney and Moten, who really, I mean, they argue that critique, the critical scholar is in fact on the forefront of the frontier in a way, because they are thinking out of the box. They're doing disruptive work, potentially innovative work, to allow for new streams of thought to be capitalized on, even as they are disruptive, even as they are anti-systemic. So I think that's important to know. And I think the third and final point of frontierism is that, you know, in this world where we are made to sell ourselves, we're made to become like, you know, our tweets and our Instagram, we're basically meant to become like self-entrepreneurs in our thoughts. You know, we're no longer, the academy is this space that, you know, becomes a professional space, but it's also one that people are resisting. And you see that through these YouTube pundits, you know, cherry picking of ideas, picking and choosing, becoming superstars this way, you know, sort of philosophers, very ahistorical and apolitical approach, which is extremely dangerous actually. But yet it's encouraged by this very same knowledge economy, which is just ruthless in the way that it's just about selling ideas. It's not about you know, the political ramifications of that. And I think political ecologists have to be extremely aware of that, and how our work in the university might be perpetuating certain things. That's I'll end that there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I took too long.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for kind of using the concept of the frontier to think about the political economy of knowledge, in the end of which we become part when we enter the academic landscape. In relation to this, also, I think I would like to ask you to share a couple of thoughts on a point that Camelia raises. Camelia is raising questions about power asymmetries in terms of knowledge, north-south, also in the field of political ecology. And she would like to have some reflections by you on the extent to which kind of there is an asymmetry between global north and global south in terms of distribution of research capacities, and linked to the fact that there's quite a strong hegemony, possibly in political ecology, held by institutions in the global north. So to what extent has political ecology been able to overcome this asymmetry in institutional and knowledge power, so to speak, and to what extent has not been the case, according to you? And you can share reflections regarding political ecology, or more broadly your experience in relation to academia. Would you like to start, Luciana? So research reproducing this hegemony held by the global north. Or
yeah, I think I would take the idea of this frontier making in the production of knowledge. You know, I don't know if we need to think about. I don't know if we need to think of frame it to the frontier making, how we can relate this asymmetrical production from global north and global south. Because that's, I think, an implication of this. No, when you we can see that as like an expansion of such a frontiers. We just, when you look at the publications, especially the publications, what counts has voices in the political ecology, you know, and always you can, the majority of time, the most of time, sorry, you see that there is a presence of a white male researcher that is on the head of such a research, and then which counts has publications, because, for example, we have plenty of scholars in the global south thinking this, reflecting about the same things that are on the top of the agenda in the global north, but they are not even recognized as skilled or expert voice. And And sometimes I would say that we have to reflect it, how much of this knowledge that has been published and produced in the global north or the Western academy has been built on the knowledge that they capture from the communities and this engagement with communities in Global South, and their own explanations and their own understandings on the problems, on the issues that they are investigating now. So we should think about it. And I will think about my own position here as Brazilian scholar and as Portuguese speaker. It's a settler language, but I mean, for example, I will give as an example from securitization of climate change. There are some productions in Brazilian scholars from Brazilian scholars here, but I think I've never seen such a scholars being published or being quoted in such a research. Do you know what I mean? Like, even for example, about displacements, environmentally induced displacements. We have scholars talking about this in the Global South, but they are never quoted in such political economy of knowledge, because their voices doesn't count as a legitimate voice, I would say, even if they are scholars in the Global South. And the metrics that are used are based on quotation. But how can you make part of the metrics if you are even not recognized as a scholar or important scholar? I think it's changing a bit now, but these knowledge, how can I say, knowledge colonialism should be questioned. And we should, for example, when we consider those metrics, when you consider, especially, for example, I have applied for jobs in the UK and in Europe, and they never consider my publications in Portuguese and Brazilian journals, because it doesn't count. It seems that I have never been written a paper before. Just when I enter to the Anglophone university, it's a kind of erasing my own past of as a researcher, as a scholar as well in my country, and this is not fair. I'm talking about from someone that is in the other side of this in this frontier, no? And I think that we shouldn't not talk about that much on frontier, but we should really think about we should talk about border. How can you transform those frontiers in borders and blur a bit such lines and division and bring the people from the other side to this dialogue and conversation? And we also recognize, and also not only recognize, but I mean, which kind of recognition we are also providing to them, and because it also counts, no? How we could recognize someone. And we should have this kind of discussion, maybe not frontier knowledge, but this border knowledge. Let's come here, let's gonna discuss this. Which kind of questions do you think that is interesting to you to reply? Not my only questions based in this kind of morbid interest sometimes, but I mean, what counts, what can add into research and reflection on it? So I think we should, trying to answer in this question or this issue, I think, this is my standpoint, my point of view.
Thank you, Luciana. And several participants are asking quite similar questions about what are ways in which critical work in academia can be potentially mobilized to escape this kind of colonial cage. So are there ways for critical scholarship and work to contribute to the fight against colonial relations and contribute to decolonization? And any thoughts on this, either in terms of approaches or maybe even in terms of practical research methods? We got questions both more conceptually and concerning research methods by Laura and Ilaria as well. Any thoughts, Vijay, on this? I know it's a difficult question, but
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of ways, I mean, not only in methods, but also in approaches, and also, and I think also sort of externally and internally, I think, in the way that we do research. So externally, perhaps, you know, recognizing that, um, yeah, I mean, I guess how can we as academics, I mean, as a political ecologist academic in a university, actively put the knowledge economy, the exploitative knowledge and the colonial knowledge economy as the root of what we are fighting against. So when we talk about activist research, I think that also requires it is of course you know, being on the ground with grounded struggles and supporting that and documenting and doing archiving work and this kind of important work. But at the same time, it's also about defying our own, you know, as activist research, we are defying our institutions. We have to, you know, break the boundaries of our institutions, and not in a way to become more, you know, oh, you're being more innovative, like be disruptive so you can be more innovative. That's what we want. That's very you know, that cannot be allowed to happen. We have to be very aware of these processes happening within the university, because there's always that pressure, you know, you know, you want to always think a little bit outside of the box, because then that's better. But then every time you think out of the box, the more you do that, the more you're actually expanding the box, you know. So there's that. And then internally, I think just creating a space within our institutes where we can actually share and reach out to each other, support each other, and not only within our institutes, but then laterally across other institutes, creating networks that, you know, those sort of kitchen table type of discussions that cannot necessarily happen within the walls of the institution, but happen outside, but then creating the spaces where we can do that. I think with all of these virtual technologies, we might be able to host things and events, host spaces that necessarily are not affiliated with the university or the institute, but are actually discussing and reflecting upon what we are doing in those spaces. So they, yeah, we could create like a parallel platform, let's say. I'll yeah, some thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks, Vijay. And I think that, yes, this questioning of the of tight boundaries between, say, researcher and participants, but also more broadly academic, the academic community and communities, open objects and so on, are strong components of reflexive approaches that try to escape colonial thinking also within political ecology. In this respect, and I'm here engaging with a question that Noel Hanla is raising in the chat, and that you both have touched upon, the idea that research should engage with or contaminate itself with activism is a quite important one, I think, that is often debated. And I know that, for instance, Luciana has worked quite a bit on this. So maybe, Luciana, would you like to share a few thoughts from your own experience about how, as a researcher, you try to engage also with activism, and maybe if you could just reflect on some of the tensions you encounter. We know it's important and good to do that, but could you tell us a bit about, say, also the tensions and challenges that you found there?
Okay. Oh, thank you for the question. It's from my friend, Noni. Hello, Noni. Oh, well. First of all, I would like to share my thoughts on what I understand by the activist research. I understand in a more broader way. And for me, it means, first of all, there's a kind of normative standpoint, and also a method of doing research. And it basically means this idea of affirm our political alignment and commitment with these such organized, marginalized indigenous groups, no? And in their struggle, and allow the dialogue with them to trying, I think is an attempt to shape such structures of injustice and oppression, no? But I think is a like quite ambitious when we are thinking about it. But mainly allow them because they have voice. I have to say, they have voice, but we are not maybe are not hearing. Listening to them, but they have voice. So we should create space to such a voice came out. And I think that active research is this place, to allow this happen. And I will use, for example, my research in Rio, but I also have a self-critique on it about the tensions. If I think about the tensions now, this kind of engagement is inspiring. It's wonderful. It's really, how can I say, seductive, I would say. But also we should look at this kind of engagement can be compromised by some kind of some power relations and structures that exist in such a community as well, no? So we need to understand that when we are committed as advocates of local or global justice, we are also partially complicit in such a very structures of injustice as well, no? That we are seeking now to oppose. And because those movements also have their own contradictions, and we cannot, how can I say, romanticize those contradictions. And because in my example, for example, when I was working with the Favela Dólares movements, some voices within those movements were just being silenced, especially the voice from the vulnerable, the most vulnerable among the vulnerables. And they were also being, how can I say, criticized for criticized and how can I say, stigmatized as victims of the process of displacement. So I think that we should also have take a step back and look, and I think the self-reflexivity, it also helps us to do it. We should always self-reflect on this process, because otherwise we can just all to be complicit with such structures of domination and injustice, and we can just blur or erase some voices that are totally, how can I say, subsumed on those kind of movements. So this is my reflection on this. Activist research can be challenging, can be inspiring, but we have always to self-reflect on our own role, because as I told you before, Brazil is a settled colonial country. We have such a kind of internal colonialism that we should be really critical when you're analyzing that, to not reproduce such a mechanism. They are so subtle that we cannot sometimes understand it. And those mechanisms are also present in such a movements. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luciana. So in a sense, you are urging us to stay with the trouble, to replicate the old motto, which is probably one of the most important things to remember. We have a number of questions that, unfortunately, for this time, I think will remain unanswered as we reach the end of the seminar. And I would like to thank all participants for taking part and raising such good questions. And I'm sorry that we couldn't cover everything, but hopefully we managed to touch upon some of the key, in particular, tensions and contradictions that we encounter when doing research in broadly speaking, the field of political ecology, and the difficulty in escaping what we could call the kind of cage of coloniality that we often remain chained to, also within political ecology as an environment or discipline, and sometimes even risk reproducing with our practices. So in a sense, thanks Luciana for the kind of incitation to stay with the trouble. Once again, many thanks to our speakers, Vijay and Luciana, to Francis Cleaver and Mona Dajani and John Childs for organizing the seminar. This is not the last seminar. There will be more occasions to think and discuss about current themes and challenges in the field of political ecology. And there will be a video recording of the seminar made available on YouTube in case you missed part of it or you would like to go back to this. So thank you very much to the speakers and participants, and have a good weekend, and see you for the next political ecology discussion here at the Lancaster Environment Center.